Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Ben, Ben.
Hello.
Okay. G01. G01. Okay. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. How are you doing?
What's
Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
yes?
Okay, great. We have a few minutes to commence the session. Saya ini ya, ini dalam soal. Oh, 250. No, I'm watching. Oh, good, good. Thank you.
We have any of panelists in the room at LSA?
Yes, I'm a panelist.
S- Sorry, I mean physically in the in Lagos. So I see Mary and Aisha, um, and then we also have Daniel and Rosetta.
So we have some.
Or
We
Dan.
have a speaker here.
Okay, which speaker?
Daniel.
Daniel. Daniel. Okay, great. But Rosetta is not.
Rosetta is also here too.
Rosetta and Daniel are there. Okay, great. So we have everybody. Okay, wonderful.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so should we begin?
Yeah, please. Let's go ahead.
Okay. So welcome everybody. Good afternoon to everyone in Lagos. Good morning to those of you who may, like myself, be on morning time. I am Ben Mendelsohn. I'm a professor of film and digital culture at Portland State University, Portland, Oregon, in the USA, where the current local time is 7:45 a.m., which is okay. I did a panel the other day that was 3 a.m. my time, so this is easier. So we are here for films, Nollywood, part two. 5 papers, including my own, which means in order to have at least a good 15 minutes for question and answer at the end, we should keep these presentations to a hard 14, 15 minutes to enable that. So since we have a full slate and everyone's here, which I'm excited. I'm excited about. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So our first speaker is Mary Adeyemo from Kansas State University, and I'll hand it over to you. And Mary, I might just need to interrupt when we get low on time to let you know.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now.
You have sharing permission?
Not yet. I just sent in a request
Please go
for
ahead.
that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Go on.
That should be it. Okay, I believe everyone should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be presenting on the topic, Stay Out of My Way, Rhetorical Agency and Multimodality in Niyi Akimolayon's COVID-19 Awareness Animation Video. So my purpose today is to explore how rhetorical agency is established through multimodal discourse analysis elements in 2 episodes of Niyi Akimolayon's videos. So I'm going to start by giving a brief situational context that surrounds the release of the videos. Then I will provide a summary of the animation videos. I'll talk about rhetorical agency and multimodality briefly. And thereafter, I'm going to get onto my analysis to show how Niyi Akimolayo deploys rich multimodal elements to construct children as rhetorical agents. So the COVID-19 pandemic led to a global demand for effective health communication strategies. In Nigeria, multimodal media interventions such as animations were deployed to influence public behavior. However, little research has gone into the strategies employed in such media interventions, particularly with regards to rhetorical agency and multimodality. Scholars like Marilyn Cooper, 2011, Risa Apolga, 2012, Elizabeth of Clausen, 2018, have argued about where agency resides in discourses, whether it's inherent in the individual or accorded to them by other people and factors. So in agreement with Elizabeth Ofsen, 2018, I'm going to argue that speakers are accorded agency by factors other than themselves. 2 animation videos by Niyi Akimolayo during the pandemic serve as the data for this study. In the videos, I examine the construction of children as rhetorical agents as well as how children leverage multimodal communicative tools to achieve persuasive impact. The animation videos were particularly remarkable because they made use of children as the major characters. In the first episode of the animation, a young boy called Abib tries to sneak out of the house to play football with his friends, but his sister Funke tries to prevent him from going out of the house by helping him see a corona monster with sharp teeth. In the second episode, Abib, who now complies with the regulation, teams up with his sister to prevent their father from going out. And so I posed some questions. You would wonder, who was Akim Olayan's target audience? Why exactly does he choose children as the character for the video? According to Akim Olayan himself, he had created the videos to explain the COVID-19 lockdown to his 5-year-old daughter. However, a closer look at the animation video shows that there is more than meets the eye with regards to, one, the intended audience of the video, and two, the rhetorical choices of the author. And that leads me to explore my video through the lens of rhetorical agency and multimodality. According to Riza Applegarth, we tend to treat children as symbols rather than rhetors. We assume that their words and actions are not their own, that they are not speaking, but being manipulated by other agents. And while that argument holds true in some respects, it is also true that children can influence public behavior. Through an analysis of these elements, I argue that children possess rhetorical agency and can influence public behavior. This study reveals that factors like role reversals, challenging existing cultural stereotypes, and the expression of professional and non-professional knowledge can give power to individuals, particularly children. This study also observes the multimodal elements that aid the conferment or denial of agency on those individuals, including factors like sound, gestures, tone, intonation, and theatrics. So I draw on rhetorical agency to provide my analysis. Multimodality refers to the expression of meaning beyond words. So there are other means of communication like sound, gestures, tone, dressing. All of those put together come together to perform multimodal communication, while rhetorical agency is the capacity to effect change through speech. As mentioned earlier, I argue in agreement with Austin that agency is attributed to individuals by factors larger than themselves. So now I'm going to go into some close reading of the video with respect to how much time permits us this morning. In the first episode, Funke wields agency through possession of knowledge that her brothers have. Episode 1, an argument ensues between Funke and as Funke tries to prevent Habib from going out. Habib says, "On my way, I'm going to play football with my friend. There's nothing you can." At that instant, Funke turns to face him and shouts, "Silence! You think this is funny? Eh? Excuse me. You can get the deadly coronavirus." Akim Molayan illustrates the power tussle by having children face each other as though they were in a wrestling match. Who would win the contest for authority among the two children? The defiant younger brother or his elder sister? Abib defies Funke's authority by wagging his finger at her, but eventually he succumbs to Funke's role after she tells him the consequence of going out in spite of the monster being there. She even corroborates that information with evidence by telling Abib to see for himself. Then Abib opens the door, peeps, sees the raging monster, and gets back inside. Only then does Abib succumb to his older sister's authority. From his aunt Akimbo, his posture now changes and his hands drop to his side. He listens to his sister with rapt attention and runs back upstairs. Abib's changed posture signals a shift from defiance to surrender. By ascribing agency to Funke because of her knowledge of the situation, Akimolayo communicates that in times of crisis, agency should reside with the knowledgeable. And that agency is, of course, conferred on children characters. In addition to establishing agency by knowledge, Akimolayo challenges inherent authority through a reversal of roles. Episode 2 opens with a huge man strutting out of the house and towards his car. The fact that there's a huge man compared to little children is already a show of a display of authority in some respect. And Funke, who is seated at a corner of the veranda, calls out to him. Her intonation falls flat. Where are you going, Dad? Unlike when she was trying to stop her brother from going out, she addressed her father in a less challenging way. She asserts her authority in the scene with an awareness that she's talking to an older person deserving respect. Funke demonstrates two kinds of authority. To her dad, she demonstrates the one innate in her as a child, and she does that in a very careful way. But to her mother, she demonstrates the one accorded her by the circumstance. She sounds much more patronizing when she challenges her dad's response. I know, Dad, but where is your face mask? She uses hesitancy and speaks in a calmer tone than she did with Habib when she speaks with her father. However, when her father remains hesitant, there's a swift shift of authority between them. Funke suddenly gets up from her seat, closes the book she is reading, and steps up to face her father squarely. This action visually depicts a challenge of the embedded authority that her father holds by virtue of being elderly. So naturally, her father holds some authority, but Funke literally stands up to him and challenges that authority. Like a cop calling for reinforcement, Funke summons a brother, and their father can do nothing at this point but to look back and forth between both children's direction. There is not only a handover of embedded authority from father to children, there is also a reversal of roles. By natural expectations, we would think that parents are the ones supposed to look after their children and protect them from harm. But in Abib and Funke's case, they are now the agents guarding their father. In challenging the inherent authority that their father has, Akinfolayan reverses the responsibility of care, nurture, and responsibility that parents have and puts it on the two children. To buttress this reversal, Akinfolayan attributes the role of a doctor to Abib. Abib, with his index finger, motions to his father to turn around and move over to his left side. And that act is rich with a lot of cultural implications. In the Yoruba culture where the plot is set, it is culturally inappropriate for children to look at elders in the eye, point fingers at them, let alone wag their fingers at elders. So that's the depiction of that act is laced with a lot of cultural implications for agency in that context. And with the authority conferred on Abib as a medical practitioner, he enforces the regulations on his father without asking for his father's opinion. He checks his father's temperature and does all he should do medically. And before their father could recover from that shocked state, Abib wears the mask over his father's face. This act of wearing the mask over his father's face signals an enforcement of authority because it takes away his father's will and choice. He does not ask for his father's opinion, he only does what he expects his father to do. And even though their dad looks towards Funke and protests, this is ridiculous. Funke retorts, it's not about you, Dad. Everyone must wear a face mask to protect themselves and everyone around them. And in that instance, is promoting the notion of agency without regard for personal sentiments. Abib's action in preventing the spread of the virus is what places him on that high pedestal, not his age, not his status in society. Akim Folayan's deployment of these contrastive features For grants, Hobson's argument that rhetorical agency is not inherent in speakers, but is attributed to them by others. In conclusion, we have together explored the construction of children as rhetorical agents who can influence public behavior through Akinmolayon's media construction, and have proven that authority is not necessarily always inherent in individuals, but can be enacted by factors outside of them. I demonstrate that authority is vested in knowledge, law enforcement agents, and medical practitioners, and other forms of authority are subjected to those recognized rules. There are a number of other readings in this study, but I can't explore them all because of our limited time frame. And when the time comes, I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mary, for the presentation. And so we're gonna shift our order a little bit. Daniel, we're gonna move on to your presentation. Aisha Babatunde will be presenting last. I'll pass it over Daniel Adeyinke Johnson, who's presenting Movies That Play in Our Mind, African Stories, Science Fiction, and Horizons of Imagination.
Can you hear the speaker, please?
We heard you.
No need. Can you hear
We
the
can't.
speaker, please?
No, we can't hear. We can hear you, but haven't heard
Okay.
anyone else.
Okay, go ahead and speak. Right. Go ahead while we sort that. Hold on. Network is.
Can the speakers not sit where you are, Skiru? Because then we can hear then Skiru, then we can hear them.
Can you move to this place? All
right, please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
All right. So my name is Daniel Adinka Johnson. For those of you who missed that, I'm going to be talking about movies that play in our minds, African stories, science fiction, the horizons of imagination. So I'm going to be telling a story while making this presentation. So I'd like you to come along as I tell you the stories, as I make this presentation. So when we talk about science fiction, when we talk about fiction generally, what do we understand by the term fiction? Ordinarily, we think about things that are unreal, things that are completely fabricated and fictitious. So what does that connote for us to talk about fiction? What does it say when we talk about things that are abstractions, the illusion of fiction? So I assert that fiction is an illusion, given that it cannot be founded on facts. It cannot be founded on empirical evidence, at least at the point of conception or at the point of creation. So I accept that fiction is a contraction, abstraction, and itself, it is not real. And then, if fiction is not real, if it's a contraction of abstractions, then what is science fiction? What is scientific about something that is completely unreal? What do we mean by science fiction when fiction itself is based on obscure, unfounded, unprovable substances, maybe material substance or whatever? So if all fictions are a combination of abstraction, how then did we come about its science? To say that science fiction is a concept, but fiction itself is a combination of several abstractions. So how did we reach the conclusion that there is a science, or there should be a science to fiction? So is fiction a scientific process? That's the first question that I'm going to ask. So first, let me talk about fiction. How do we come about fictions? What are fictions? What do we understand by fictions? Fictions are thought processes. They are a product of thought work. We don't come about fiction all of a sudden. It's a process of imagination. Fiction is a byproduct of imagination. It requires you to process mental images, removing the unknown from what is known, referencing the unknown from what is known. So you don't just make up things from what you don't know, except you are God, of course. There's a religious intonation to that, where God made all the things that He made from what did not exist. Everything that we create as human is referenced from what we already know. So be it planes that are created, referencing birds that already fly in the air that we already know. So everything that we create are byproducts of things that we already know. And by default, imagination. So when we imagine things, can you hear me, please? All right, I'll continue anyway.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Right, so when we imagine
Yes,
things,
we
when we add to our imaginations, we create abstractions from our mind, we picture them, and then we conjure them together and combine them to form a whole. It is a product of imagination. So if we say fiction is a scientific process, whether it be romantic fiction, whatever kind of fiction it is, if we say science can also be a form of fiction. Fiction can also be a form of science. And imagination then is the first cognitive technology because it requires you to think before you can create fiction. And when you create this fiction, how do you bring them into substantiation? By default, it is by imagination. And by that imagination, it is a cognitive process. It takes someone who has cognition to be able to imagine. So I therefore refer to imagination as a cognitive technology. I said imagination that we all imagine that we cannot all imagine. So take a moment to think about that. What if we all cannot imagine? So all the abstractions that we can come out with all the things that we can imagine, all the things that we can now think of as fictitious or maybe realistic. Imagine that we cannot even imagine those things. So I dare to say that imagination is the first technological evidence of human cognition. As long as you can imagine, it is the first evidence that you are human. If you are not able to imagine, to picture things, to create mental abstraction, it is impossible for us to ascribe humanity to you. So imagination is the first cognitive technology. I go forward to say that abstraction and bridging of the known and unknown is what we call fiction. When we combine together what we know, referencing them to what we do not know, that is what we call fiction. Fiction is the bridge between what is known and what is not known. So I talk about the political dimension of speculative thought. I said fiction isn't just about stories, it's about power. So I turned the political dimension to speculative thought, to imagine things that are not in existence. I ascribe a political dimension to it, asserting that there is power in fiction, however it is created, whether it be scientific, whether it be historical fiction, whether it be non-historical fiction, whether it be biographical fiction, whatever kind of fiction we create, there is a political dimension to it. Fiction is a tool and it is powerful. I'm moving on. So when we talk about fiction and science fiction, we are talking about, when we talk about science fiction and African science fiction, there is a thin line between what is generally understood as science fiction and what is being propagated right now, what is in mainstream knowledge, African scholarship, as science fiction. Many African scholars are now describing as science fiction. Scholars like Nedil Korafor, so how do we differentiate science fiction, what is understood as Western science fiction, from African science fiction? Why do they have to be a kind of Western science fiction? Why does it have to be different from African science fiction? There a particular way of seeing the abstraction differently in Western conventional science fiction from that of African science fiction. Since all processes, whether it be conventional science fiction or African science fiction, since they are all products of abstractions and they are byproducts of imaginations. So how then do we now categorize one as Western science fiction and then leave the other one and describe it as African science fiction? I think that this kind of stratification calls us to go back to colonial influences and colonial baggages. I'm going to talk about comparing epistemologies. Western science fiction and all of its anxieties, all of its I'm trying to figure out the right word to use, all of its fascination with dystopian futures, technologies, AI takeovers, and alien futures, intergalactic reality, and all of that. Why does it make that conventional science fiction and make African science fiction, on the other hand, which is most likely focused on spirits, dreams, ancestral memory, or metaphysical time? Why is it any different? Why is Western science fiction ascribed the term as a conventional term? Why African science fiction has to be ascribed to a particular continental space? So I go ahead to explain that this is as a result of colonial privileges. Given that what constitutes knowledge, what constitutes what we know, what constitutes what is canonized as knowledge, enjoys colonial privileges. As a result, whatever comes from Africa is relegated as inferior, and whatever comes from Western societies is practically by default the ideal, in quote, and conventional. I talk about Western science fiction as being monodirectional. I talk about Western science fiction as being limited because it is only based on material and empirical substances, things that can be substantiated by facts and empirical evidences. But then, how then can we limit abstractions to what we can feel, what we can see, what we can actually substantiate? How then does one say that an abstraction is something that we can see? When the term abstraction itself refers to something that we can only imagine, but we can't necessarily see in a physical form. I argue that the dimensional pluralism of African speculative words makes African stories by default qualify for the description as science fiction. By default, African stories can be labeled science fiction, and in that conventional sense, not just African science fiction as it is being labeled in the academia. We actually stratify African science based on stuff like spirits, dreams, and ancestral memories. So I argue that African science fiction is compatible with Western science fiction. Meanwhile, Western science fiction does not allow room for things such as spirits, dreams, ancestral memories, or metaphysical time, creating a limitation on what abstraction we can create, so as to fit into the category of what we know as science fiction. I argue that African science fiction, on the other hand, what we know as African science fiction, constitutes all features of what is inherent in the conventional science fiction, and even more, it goes beyond the limit of what we know in Western science fiction. So I ask, who says spirits do not use technology? Because in many instances, African stories are relegated to things like myths, folk tales, legends, and all of that, because they are not based on the material technology, the empirical substances that can be substantiated by physical facts. So why do we now say that African science fiction does not fit in to be described as science fiction correctly without being stratified as African? Is it because they do with spirits? Is it because they talk about legends, ancestors, and all forms of occultic or religious practices? What stops those stories from meeting up to the standards of Western conventional science fiction? I proceed to say that.
Daniel, sorry to interrupt. We just have about 2-3 minutes remaining. Just to let you know.
I'm going to wrap up. So I conclude to say that because of the nature of African stories, we tend to relegate them to things like folk tales, legends, myths, and all of that, because of the natures of African stories, which are usually delivered through the words of mouth, what we know as oral literature and oral tradition. So I ask, is orality not a speculative technology? Words in Africa, which are the means by which communication takes place, hold meaning. They have a life of their own. They take form of their own. When the word steps out of the mouth, it takes a form of its own. It takes shape. It has a life of its own. It can move. It can, whatever it takes. Words are not just ordinary in Africa. They require you to process them. They require you to ingest them. Words are not just spoken to the ears. They are edible. You can see them. You can feel them in your hands, whatever part of your body. You can actually feel words. That's how African words are. African words are not just uttered. They are actual beings themselves. I say that this word invites the audience to participate in giving them meaning. So one thing can mean 10 things to 10 different people in Africa. Says that one thing, the same thing that should ordinarily mean the same thing to everybody. It can take different forms in the mind of different audience. What's African words that makes up the stories in Africa have independence of their own, and the audience is required to participate in determining how these words work. Then I talk about all African authored narratives and how they are easily relegated to other genres of creations and all of that. And I talk about how words create screens in our mind. I talk about how these words expect us to relive them in our mind, not just listen to them, but to relive them in our mind. I go ahead to talk about Africa. I'm going to skip this quickly. I think I already mentioned something about these. So, what then is the boundaries of imagination? Western science fiction is fascinated with technology, intergalactical conquest, and all of that. What then is the limit? Is African science doing too much? African science fiction, is it doing too much? Is what we are doing as African science fiction creators, by our stories, by our other author creators, African narratives, how how do they exceed the bounds, or how do they fail to meet the boundaries of science fiction? Of course, these are just colonial boundaries that are set by colonial and superpower countries, whereby African author narratives are relegated to second class and regarded as inferior. So as African creators, as Africans, I beckon on Africans to about, to think beyond the horizon. African is currently preoccupied with creating narratives of redemption, narratives of decoloniality, and all of that. And then I dare to say that after all of this, what next? What is the next thing that we can think about? What are the things that we must think about as African creators to help African authored narratives in reshaping global future? I wish I had enough time. I would have been able to continue to explain this further, but I think I'm going to just conclude here. I conclude that African stories are at the heart of science fiction. We cannot talk about African stories. I talk about science fiction without talking about African stories, because at the very heart, African stories is science fiction. Every element of science fiction, whether it be material or immaterial, are inherent in African stories. I also conclude that African stories are the movies that play in our mind. They are not just watched for us to listen, they are watched for us to recreate in our mind, to reinterpret. They invite us to create them and make meaning of them. However, our imaginative horizons can allow us to go. I also conclude. Finally, I say that African author narrative must reclaim agency. We must detach ourselves from the need to seek Western validation by creating fictitious stories or fictions that has to meet with what is described as science fiction in Western quarters. We must continue to think about spirit, but we must not also forget to think about technologies. We must continue to think about ancestors, but we must not forget to think about space, think about the galaxy, and to think about the entire universe of our world. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel, for your presentation. And look forward to discussing with you further. So my presentation is next, so I will jump into it. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to speak and I'll try to keep my remarks brief so that we can make up a little bit of time for Q&A. But also because this is a book chapter that is not as developed as I would like it to be at this point in time. So I'm just going to kind of give some sketches of some writing that I'm working on, documenting lagoon life worlds. Lagoon life worlds, a term utilized. Oh, I should start the timer now for myself. Excuse me. Documenting lagoon life worlds, and lagoon life worlds being an important terminology utilized in the artist, architect, and filmmaker Dele Adeyemo's A Dance of the Mangroves, a project that appears in a number of different formats, pictured here in my title slide, in a 30-minute video installation that Dele exhibited at the 2023 Architecture Biennale in Venice. And I'll talk a little bit about this film and why it's so interesting to me, as well as provide a little bit of background on how it fits into some of my larger research and writing project. So, A Dance of the Mangroves it's interesting that this is a panel titled Nollywood, because so far all three of our speakers, Mary, Daniel, and myself, are a little bit more specific and not talking about conventional or sort of the most popular and widespread forms of Nollywood film or audiovisual production. A Dance of the Mangroves is a kind of multi-voiced, I would call it polyvocal experimental documentary in which one of the centerpieces is the reality television and online influencer Hermes Iyele, who some of you may be familiar with as a kind of celebrity who's from Oworonshoki, the Lagoon Front community that has been the site of multiple waves of forceful evictions in recent years, as well as being an important site of sand mining as part of the sort of sedimentary economy or the sedimentary infrastructure in the language of Delhi's film. And one of the interesting things that happens is that Hermes is not only featured as a dancer in this project, but he also embeds with the sand miners and kind of bleeds the boundary between a kind of documentary or a essay film, a research-based essay film, and something that is a little bit more performance-based, a little kind of semi-fictionalized, and something that starts to kind of bleed the genre boundaries between different modes of filmmaking. And so here we have an image from one of the pivotal scenes in which Hermes, who's as far as I understand, not experienced as a diver or someone who works in sand extraction in this community, performing the work of a sand miner in Oronchoki. So this is one section of a larger project that I'm working on called Urban Coastal Archives, Documentary Media and Popular Culture in Lagos, that began by focusing on Echo Atlantic City and this spectacular land making project off Victoria Island along the Atlantic coast, but which has, since my initial visit to Lagos to begin researching this particular project in 2014, has expanded to really look at the intersection of visual culture, the intersection of contemporary popular culture, and processes of land making, swamp clearance, mangrove conversion, dredging and sand filling, which is widespread across all levels of the economic spectrum, from informal settlements to spectacular high-end mega developments across the city. And I would also argue intersects extensively. Land making, dredging, and sand filling intersect extensively with visual culture production in Lagos. A starting point for me is really thinking about the intersection of the city's creative ecologies or ecologies of artistic production, media production, and the city's transforming urban coastal ecology under conditions of accelerating climate change. So this is a slide that I use often, especially when speaking to non-Nigerian audiences, to kind of talk about this intersecting set of phenomena, how we can think about explosive productivity in Nigeria and specifically Lagos-based creative industries, from visual art, painting, photography, fashion, um, music, obviously, Nollywood cinema, obviously, and how all this is happening at the same time that the city more and more frequently becomes oftentimes the solid ground, which was once water in many cases, was once part of the lagoon in many cases, floods and becomes water.
Hello. Hi, Ben. Hi, Ben.
Okay.
Hi, welcome. Can you hear us?
I'll go ahead. And Nigerian diasporic visual artists who have done video work, deal with sand mining, land dredging, sand filling, and land reclamation in Lagos. Um, One of the things that's really fascinating about particular project, in addition to its mixing of reality television, dance, popular music, elementary infrastructures, the labor of the kind of underpaid labor of extracting this material that is what an infrastructure studies scholar named Ashley Kars has said, nothing can happen in temporary city building without sand. You cannot make concrete, you cannot make blocks, you cannot make buildings, you cannot make streets, you cannot glass, right? Sand, you can't make computers. Sand is in everything. Um, this intersection of urban infrastructure, a shifting lagoon ecology, and popular culture. Dele Are also infuses this film, his engagement with the subject matter, with a strong reflection on Yoruba cosmology, um, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware. The creation myth in Yoruba thought involves converting into ground, carrying dirt down from the heavens and compacting it into solid ground. So when Dele exhibited this film at the Architecture Biennale, he cut it into an oval as opposed to a rectangular shape, projected onto a sandy surface on a divination table, and combined the sort of exhibition format. The exhibition format kind of materially instantiates the film's engagement with thinking about the interrelationship between contemporary ecological transformations lagoon ecology through sedimentary extraction and engagement with Yoruba cosmology and maybe and thinking about what this episode mean in relationship to some of the deeper dimensions of Yoruba thought. As I mentioned, this is a sort of nascent bit of writing. I'm continuing to work on, and so I'd welcome any, questions, provocations, and suggestions about this project. And for anyone who is interested, uh, you can find this film available to watch on the Audiomo's Vimeo page. And if you're tracking it down, to email directly, and I can send you a link to check it out. Piece of work that I encourage everyone to take a look at. So I will stop there and back to my program. So we have about 35 minutes left. I'm going to take up as much time as I can. On my talk, we have Rosetta Ince from the National Film Institute in Jos. Stories, the eclectic potential of oral narratives in. So I don't. Rosetta speaking yet? She's not speaking yet, is she?
Evening. My name is Rosetta.
Hi, Rosetta. So I think we need you position for us to hear you line more or less where Daniel was sitting close to the the computer in order to hear
Is
you
it better
speak.
now? Is it better?
We can hear you. It's much better. Thank you.
Okay. So the title of the paper is Exploring the Eclectic Potentials of Oral Narratives in Film. All right. So folk tales are traditional stories told orally and handed down from one generation to the next. From time immemorial in all African societies, they normally teach the young ones, the youth, the young in heart, and the preteen children. They teach them all the proper ethics of the society through the agency of the folktale. The folktales are normally stories that are just told. They are fictional, but every character, they're animals, spirits, birds, even plants, they all have human attributes. So the children can easily identify with the characters and learn from them. According to Aporobaro, folktales are incredible stories told for entertainment and handed down either in written form or oral form, basically for its didactic nature. Normally, after work, during leisure, that is what they gain, entertainment through the folktale. And also they learn about the culture from the folktale, and the children also learn how to relate with each other by gathering to listen to those tales. Most of the major animation projects in Hollywood are adapted directly from folktales from different cultures. Apart from the usual Cinderella and all the run-of-the-mill stories, important, more serious-minded thematic preoccupations are seen in adaptations like Strange Magic, Moana, Mulan, The Lion King, Braveheart, Coco. All of them have very serious themes that they project. We see that folktales have so much to teach, and Nigeria particularly, being a babel of voices, where every kilometer is a new language, it is a strange thing that with all the avalanche of stories covering every possible subject matter within our culture, the Nollywood producer seems to be very reluctant in adapting directly from, or even tangentially, from the oral narrative. Apart from the Nollywood Yoruba, I must hand it to them. They are the only ones that are doing something. But the Igbo's aspect is so disappointing. We have so many stories, but you don't see these things on the big screen. The only thing they keep on doing is recycling, themes. So now, the aim of this study is to examine the potentials of oral narratives as source subject matter for film adaptations. The study used only one tale, the tale of Oro, in order to determine ways through which they can be highlighted as source material for Nollywood films. And the objectives that set the study rolling are just to highlight and elucidate the potentials of oral narratives as source material for film using the oral tale, to examine and explicate the subject matter identified in the oral tale, and to demonstrate and establish the pedagogic thematic imports identified in the oral narrative film version of the tale. So the significance of this study is that it illuminates oral narrative as a tool for entertainment, transmission of moral values and pedagogy through the agency of the filmic medium. You can imagine, normally when the tales are told, it is just the children's imagination that they will use to picture these things. When these kinds of stories are adapted into the big screen, you can imagine the import it will have, particularly since we are decrying the inversion of the Western culture that has so eroded our African ideas that they are almost becoming extinct, and it's something that is really worrying most people. So if the Nollywood producers will be persuaded to begin to adapt from our oral tales, it will go a long way to do a lot of damage control, because our young one, particularly the Gen Z, the way they are going is really scary. And the scope is limited to just the investigation of the efficacy of the oral narrative as adaptations to the silver screen, focusing on only one tale. It is analyzed as an oral tale and then as film in order to explicate its thematic imports and look at the sequential structures and mediation of subject matter to determine the synergy that will emanate from the fusion of the oral and the filmic medium. The questions that drive this study is that what are the eclectic potentials of the oral tale as source material for filmic adaptation? How will the different subject matter identified in the oral tale elevate the film version into the sublime? In what ways do the pedagogic import of the various themes in the oral/film version of the tale manifest as a cultural lustre? The theory with which this study was explicated is basically the myth/archetypal theory, because we are exploring the folktale as a source material for Nollywood films. Myth and archetype explore the potentials of the oral text ascending into film as veritable tools of entertainment and instruction, covering a broad spectrum, array of subject matter in Nigeria, Africa, and the world over. The myth archetypal theory focuses on the recurring narrative structures, plots, symbols, character types, and images in the story. The images and symbols are identified as archetypes and patterns which run through the story. So this work utilizes concepts from the myth archetypal theory to explicate this tale. We are looking at first the narrative pattern, which is a concept that will take care of analyzing the sequential structures in the tales that ensue mediation for maximum filmic immersive experience. We're also looking at archetypal symbols, a concept that will account for characters that populate each tale through whose intentions the story is mediated. Now, let's go into the tale now. The tale oral, I'm just going to do, I just did a kind of breakdown of the major movement or plot shifts in the story. In the first movement, which is the premise, we see two boys that are living together with their different mothers and the same father. It's a polygamy situation. Now, the first wife is loved by the husband, but the second wife is not loved. The second wife is sent outside to go and live in the smaller adjoining hut, while the first wife and her son lives with the father inside the house. In movement 2, we see the situation changing. The first wife sends the son to go to the market and sell a basin of avocados. Now the son is setting out on a journey. Normally, most people folktales always present this journey motif, through which there is a kind of illumination at the end of the entire story for the listeners. So in movement 3, the journey has now been set up, and the boy goes to a kata. He meets a spirit fellow there who asks him to follow him so that he can pay for the avocados. As they go home, the boy is tested through different kinds of temptation. He has to pass through 7 different tests that tested his character. He was tested if he could steal, if he could lie, if he has sympathy, if he was greedy. All sorts of tests came in. And when the boy passed the test very well because he's a good boy, he was rewarded greatly, given so many things. And he was even given a gentle breeze that blew him home. The other wife became jealous and sent his son to also go and sell. And when the boy happened to also see this spirit man, he followed him home. But because the other boy was not brought up well, or he hasn't been listening to the details of the culture, he failed all the 7 tests. And he was given gifts too. And he came home with a very terrible wind that was hitting him all over the place. When he got home, he took his mother into the house. The mother was happy because he brought in a big casket. They opened it and all sorts of horrible things came out, including snakes that killed them. So at the end of the story, you discover that virtue is its own reward, while vice is a very serious trap, which this kinds of story will definitely touch the young one and sweating them out. And if a film is produced loaded on these things with all the kinds of all the forms of cinematic imagery and all the forms of image that are generated by the computer and everything, it's going to be an amazing thing which will immerse the viewer. So in conclusion, this paper is saying that myths, like other forms of storytelling, provide valuable insight into how people perceive and think, and that also investigate present human and non-human existence. Therefore, the mystic trust in folktales, like the one that we just went through now, which talked about the 7 cardinal virtues dictated by that particular culture, and which are vital codes for every growing up teenager, were well explicated. They are all different important thematic implications that film can be based on, and for which the viewer will not only be thoroughly entertained, will also learn a lot. Because according to Philip Sidney, art is a better teacher than moral philosophy and history, because art teaches in universals and is able to bring the entire and adapt from there. Thank you.
China, are you there? Hi, Ben.
Hello. Rosetta? Yep, we can hear you. Were you finished, Rosetta?
Yes, she has completed her paper.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll move on to our last paper. We have about 20 minutes left. So I don't want to force you, Aisha, to shorten anything, but to the extent that you come in under time, we'll have a little bit of time at the end to take questions. So let me hand it over to Tunde from the University of Georgia for our last question.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to see if I can share my. Right. Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. I'm presenting on the topic liminality, urban experiences and transnational aesthetics in God and King of Boys. City of God is a Brazilian movie that came out 2002, and it became a blockbuster and gained global recognition. And then two days later, King of Boys was also released, and the director of King of Boys, Ken Adetiba, talks about how she drew inspiration from City God and Godfather. And I'm doing comparative analysis of the two movies, particularly in how they show the urban experience, urban life, and how they navigate the idea of transnational aesthetics. I'll really be focusing on the opening scene of the movies. So these are the directors of the both movies. City of God was directed by Fernando Barilis and Keisha Lund, and King Boys was directed by Kemi Adetiba. And I'll be starting this paper with this note from Aaron Lover, which of course would be my theoretical framework. I'm using the idea of spatiality to understand how urban experience is portrayed in the movie. So my paper is the concept as it informs way urban experiences is entered in City of God and Boys. Also arguing that this movie embodied the transnational and liminal nature of contemporary world cinema. Both movies focus on overlooked experiences of people on margin by portraying characters that disproportionately represent media account of violence and criminality. In the films, we are present vibrant and complicated settings that are characterized by social inequality, violence, and rapid change. These movies make use of cutting-edge cinematic techniques, such as the handheld camera, fast editing, and a fracturative structure to create a sense of disorientation and immersion that mirrors the chaotic nature of urban life. So to also analyze the transnational flow of capital, technology, and culture in how it shaped the production and distribution of the two movies, I argue that this movie occupy a liminal space between the local and the global. And the mainstream and the independent. So this liminal position allows this movie to challenge dominant cinematic norms and to offer alternative features of the urban experience in global cinema. I draw on David Harvey's theorization of relational space-time to delineate the spatial temporal experiences in both movies as transnational cinema tests, bearing thematic relationship. So one of the questions that guided my my analysis was how do we understand the urban experience if we omit reading the city as a paradox? The city is both a space of convergence and dissonance, and connection and alienation, permanency and impermanency, as we would see in both movies. The movie City of God tells the story of the drug trade in Brazil in the 1960s. And so during the time, people were, in the movie, we met three friends, Robin Woods, with Rocket's brother, Goose, and Rocket is the narrator. And then we see Rocket, his brother, and another friend, Goose, and how they were winning admiration of everybody around with how they are carrying guns around and making a petty robbery all around. But beyond that, the film also continue in its depiction of violence that people, young children at the time, inherited all this violence from the older generation. So it's also particularly it's a real life situation in Brazil at the time where gang wars and all of that became a thing. So it also gives rise to the idea of the favela, which is a trope in Brazilian cinema industry where I want to show you how the favela looks like. Yeah. So this is it's just a congested space of different houses, and then so oftentimes when we get to see a picture of all these houses, they're always about how people are living in poor condition, how they had to take into crime and all of that. And the movie also portrayed that in such a gripping way. Although there have been criticism against it, that how it's it's feed into the idea of poverty porn ideology. And so, but it's gaining worldwide recognition, and also became a thing that Hollywood directors also came to now talk about. So I'll move on to talk about the Nollywood transformation too, particularly with Lagos as more of the social and capital city for Hollywood's transformation. During the 2010s, we see how all Nollywood underwent a serious transformation in terms of digital technologies that lead to many movies being released and streamed, and the introduction of streaming platforms also gave rise to this. And so with the rise of new technologies and focus on Lagos as a social capital, directors focus their attention to talking about the violence and the nature of Lagos City as a place of influence and all of that. So I also look at how that formed the global image for Nollywood. So we have the idea, we have what you call the old Nollywood and the new Nollywood. So the era of the 2010s emerged as the new Nollywood production. So moving on, I'm going to focus on how the movie uses violence as a motif for reading the city by rendering it as a social commentary on how violence functions to convey the liminal experiences within the postmodern cities of Rio de Janeiro and Lagos. In City of God, violence is encoded in the narrative vein of the favela. This is the favela, and as chaotic and pervasive to critique the systemic neglect and failures of the state authority that have beset the favela's inhabitants. And at the center of all this, violence is depicted through gangs activities such as random, inevitable, and all-consuming, with an outlook that leaves little room for agency. While in King of Boys, violence is also instrumental and strategic. The protagonist in King of Boys, Eniola Salami, uses it as a calculated tool to maintain order and project fear, as well as emphasizing control over the seemingly ungovernable forces of the urban underworld. In the opening scene of City of God, I want to take a moment to play the open scene here. It's so rhythmic and it's a lot of cinema. I'm sorry. I don't know if you can see my screen.
I'm so excited. I finally am able to join the walking pad early. I was finally able to get me on walking.
You can't see the slide.
It shows a blurred screen, but the video is not playing yet.
Yeah, so Aisha, maybe for the sake of time, we continue. We have about 10 minutes left in the panel.
Yes.
And if you want to take another 5 minutes or however much time you need, we could try and
Yes.
take a couple
I
questions.
just thank you. I touch on how that opening scene sets the stage for how the movie explored or uses violence. There was a rhythmic use of drums and beats about a particular chicken which is about to be slaughtered, and how this chicken ran away, and then we are caught in between a police officer and the boys or the gang was, and how our narrator Rocket is in between these tensions. And so we get a whole idea. This is also used in contrast to the opening scene of King of Boys, where it also starts with a festivity, Eniola's birthday, and the next action that happens was how Eniola murdered a man that was accused of kidnapping a daughter of a politician. So both movie follows the same template in terms of how they depict violence as gory and very as a form of realism that you feel as an audience, you feel so gripping about it. Yeah, so about the transnational aesthetic, the camera angle works in how this violence is shown in the movies, in both movies. And like I mentioned, Adetiba mentioned that she drew inspiration from City of God and also from Godfather to lay the template for the movie. And so one of the transnational effect of it was that the movie King of Boys was later serialized because of its record claim that it's won. And that is politics, commercial God being serialized. There's a return of City of God, of Rockets going back to the city 20 years later and trying to build the community back as a way of playing the counter narrative as the favela is a place of the donors and all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So sorry to cut you short. Thank you much for that presentation. Fascinating of the social philosophy. So I could ask a question first. Maybe I'll ask a question to you, Aisha. Can you tell me a little bit about your thinking of how you came to use the production of space and Lefebvre in this analysis of this analysis of urbanism in your reading of the films?
Yes, so thank you very much for that. I wasn't able to explain well on the opening scene. So in this scene, there was a bird's eye view of the whole favela, and to show that it's a really tight, congested, heavily populated area, and that also ties into how the inhabitants make their own place in terms of how they see themselves in that little world, because this is a place that has been neglected by the state authority. And even whenever there is a report of crime or anything, the police would always come later, and also they're always shooting at any time on the children. So violence has been woven into the fabric of the children's life and also of the older generation. So it became a norm, and this really shows how they see their place in the world, that the only way they can the only way they can achieve anything in this space is through violence.
Yeah, thank you. Mary, a quick question for you. Is this project connected to a broader interest in children's media or did you come to engaging with this particular set of animations in a different way? How did you come to engage with this set of videos?
Thank you for your question. My first interest in the videos actually came from a desire to explore something media related. So along the line, that was why I was exploring rhetorical agency and multimodality. Along the line, I took an interest in how it connects children with agency. So children came along the way. Thank you.
Great. Other questions? Any questions
Can
from?
we ask questions too?
Of course, no one's jumping in.
Okay, awesome. So I had a question for, I think, Daniel. When the person who presented on movies that play in our mind, I thought it was really fascinating. The things you said about African science fiction. I had never seen that dichotomy until your presentation. And so I'm interested to know whether you've gone into, as you explore the project, who are the people that set the rules and how are they particularly set those boundaries of what science fiction is and what science fiction is not. And then as you were presenting, I was looking forward to examples. So I don't know if you have any that you could share, especially of how spirits use technology. As you presented, I was thinking about the broom thing, it's a common witchcraft folktale where witches can fly on a broomstick, to sort of imitate the plane. So I was looking forward to some examples of how technology is being practiced by African science fiction. Thank you.
Can you hear me from here now?
Yes.
Yeah. Get as close as you can to the microphone.
I'm trying to quickly finish. That was why I wasn't able to mention the example. If you come across the works of Demostitutola, where he talked about excess, the palm wine talker, he talked about the ghostess with the TV hand. He described the ghostess that had a hand that could display images in real time, visual images in real time. So are we saying, what I was trying to point out is that, how do we then say that spirits not use technology? When as a matter of fact, before we could even, talking about as early as the 1940s, Constitutional was already talking about spirits and their compatibility with technology, not exempt spirits from inclusion in technology. It describes spirits as beings that can actually adapt to technology as a matter of fact, beings that live in parallel worlds. And I'm going to go about talking about this extensively, but then I think we don't have so much time. You can always communicate out this that's of knowledge. Did you hear me?
We can go though. Not maybe ways to I see we have one more we have a question in the room. Maybe we could try and squeeze that in too.
Having been listening to the speakers, I do agree that in Africa we have the stories, and those stories have to be told. But it's also important to know exactly where these stories are domiciled. Dr. Isu just mentioned that some of the folk tales that are available in some of our cultures, some of these adapted and made into films. For instance, she gave an instance of the story. And I was talking to her, I said, look, even hearing this story, it resonates with some of the stories that we told in my culture to teach morals, to encourage people to behave well and do good and all that. So I said, so these stories are there in every culture, only that we are maybe narrating them using different actors and all that. Then having said that, to him, yes, we're talking about science fiction. I could agree with you partially that we do have science fiction. Because if you go into our religion, for instance, if you go into the Ifa body of knowledge, you discover that there are a lot of stories. When you hear the Ifa priest talking, no, there are lots of stories in that poetry. There are lots of stories, and those stories have to do with our history, our culture, our belief systems, future, the creation, and all those. So our storytellers need to go back into our tradition and culture to bring out some of these stories. And if we continue to run away, not interrogate these sources, we cannot get some of the rich stories embedded into such sources, like I just mentioned, the Ifa, the divination. You know,
Yes.
I've seen a book published on this, and
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. I think that's a really wonderful place to stop. We are out of time. I've been told by the enforcer that we need to wrap up. But I think it's a wonderful comment to conclude on, just the value of embracing the repositories of stories that exist in those contexts. And I hope we see more films and more media embracing more of them. Thank you so much to our panelists and our attendees, and any additional questions that you might have for any of the speakers. Their email addresses are all on the program. Apologies that we ran a little bit low on time, and I'm very sorry also for interrupting our audience member there at the end, in the middle of your comment. But thanks so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the conference.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.